T.H. Chan's School of Public Health, and I work particularly on participatory approaches to health education, so how we can engage lots of people together to address health and environmental challenges. So our roadmap for today is to talk a little bit about crowdsourcing, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, go through some commonly used technology platforms and design features, and talk about some applications to real projects, as well as some ways to try it yourself. So how many of you have heard of crowdsourcing before? Show of hands? Wow, almost everyone. Excellent. Some commonly used definitions, these are adapted and shortened, are the practice of obtaining input by enlisting the services of a large number of people. Or the practice of engaging a crowd, if you will, or group for a common goal. Some of you may have seen that it's often credited to a writer from Wired magazine for coining this term. He was using crowdsourcing as an analog to outsourcing, which is another term you may be very familiar with. Outsourcing is where an organization might give a particular task to people outside of the organization to handle, and crowdsourcing would be really leveraging a broader crowd for that. So some of you may have heard the saying, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. What happens if you want to go far quickly, right? And this is one of the things that people working on crowdsourcing aim to look at. So I'm going to start by sharing a very classic example of a crowdsourcing challenge put out by DARPA. DARPA is the US government's Defense Advanced Research Projects agency. And in 2009, they put out 10 red balloons across the continental United States and challenged teams to find it in a week with some prize money. So this was an experiment to see how internet and social media can be used for real-time communication and practical action to address something that's both large in scope and time critical. So what do y'all think? Can I see a show of fingers? How many days do you think it took the winning team to solve the challenge? All right, I see a wide range, some as low as 1 day. And actually, the winning team from MIT found all 10 balloons in less than a third of a day. They had lots of different ways to help them do this. One is they had tiered incentives to encourage people to refer each other to this challenge. So for example, just because you may be in a place where you don't have time to look for a balloon or there's no balloon in your area, doesn't mean that you're not valuable by telling other people about the challenge in other areas, right? And so they had a system to help do this, and it also helps sustain activity, because often you get a burst of social media activity, right? And then an hour later, everybody kind of forgets about it and moves on to the next thing. This helps keep sustained activity and really get people to help spread the word. Whoops, wrong direction. And another was that you can imagine that when there's prize money involved, people can flood the challenge with lots of different reported sightings. How do you know which ones are the right ones to actually look at, right? So the MIT team had to come up with different verification processes. One was if a balloon location had multiple people reporting it, that's a good sign, right? Versus just one person reporting it. Does the IP address of the person reporting it actually match the location they say it in? Are they there, right? And also, are the photos that they sending in, are they the real photos with the red balloons with the DARPA banner, or are they just random balloons that people are seeing? So you can do all kinds of verification. So challenges like this and how successfully we've been able to address them have inspired lots of different crowdsourcing platforms. One example that I've had the privilege to help work with is the MIT Climate Collab, which aims to leverage the wisdom of the crowd to think about how we can create proposals to address global climate change, as we've just heard in the wonderful presentation earlier by Josh. I keep hitting in the wrong direction, sorry. And so that's an online platform that enables people from around the world to collaborate, and I just wanted to share a couple platforms that you may commonly see. So as we've seen, people often use the internet, whether that's going onto a website from your computer, whether that's using your device to connect to things like Twitter. There's also Internet of Things, which is where you have, are people familiar with this term, IoT? Yeah, awesome, great. So you may often see embedded in our everyday devices or everyday environment, things that can talk to each other and to the internet. And so That's another common way for devices to talk to each other. The cell phone and SMS network is actually different from your mobile data network, and so in areas where you might not have internet connectivity or might not be able to get your mobile data to work, you can still use your mobile phone and text messaging system. And GPS, global positioning system, which goes by satellite, and you don't necessarily need internet connection or even phone connection to be able to use it. Has anybody ever had the old GPS devices in your car, which is like a little, box that doesn't really update all that often or struggles a little bit? So yeah, those were things that could be used before, mobile data was widespread and can be used even when you don't have internet access. And into these platforms, you can plug and play a lot of different things, right? So for example, a lot of people have been using sensors because it's great to get human input, humans telling you, yes, I've seen this balloon here, or yes, I'm doing this thing or have this idea. But it's also great to get technologies to sense it for you, and humans can kind of move it around for you so that you can get more accurate data. So for example, an MIT startup called Sensen is attaching sensors to wheelchairs in Indonesia. Why might you want to do that, you ask? Well, a lot of wheelchairs in Indonesia are donated by places like, from places like the US. They often are designed for indoor use in hospitals or on nice paved floors, right? Which may not be appropriate for the context that it's being used in Indonesia. They can often break over there or not be very easy to use. And also, if the wheelchairs aren't sized appropriately to the person using them, they can actually cause more harm, which is the last thing we want to do. So we really want to get good, accurate data on how people are using the chairs, because if they're not using it, it might be a sign that that chair is not right for them, or maybe it's broken and it needs to be repaired, right? But what happens if I go and ask you to tell me after I've donated the chair, what do you think? Are you using the chair? How's it going? It can be really hard to be really forthright about that. And so sensors help to do that and give you an accurate sense beyond just human input. So this would be like a simple accelerometer. Often you have them on your phones to sense movement attached to a wheelchair. Another use is they're attaching it to fuel-efficient cook stoves in India. So this is in places where people are often cooking with things like charcoal or wood. Nearly 3 billion people in the world are often still using fuels like this rather than our gas and electric stoves. And it can really help to have fuel-efficient stoves, right? It reduces the indoor air pollution or the smoke inside your kitchen, and it can protect our health. Plus, it's environmentally great by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, as we've heard from Josh also. But often, again, if I simply go and ask, are you using the stove? How often are you using it? One, it can be really hard to remember daily details like that, right? Like, I would have a hard time telling you when was the last time I cooked, for how long, how much, what temperature did I cook at, all those things. So it can help to have sensors. Plus, these sensors can also help pick up on air pollution in the area that can tell you if other stoves are being used. So what happens often with fuel-efficient cook stoves is people will do something called stove stacking, which is if I provide a fuel-efficient cook stove, I might still keep my old, less efficient cook stove in the area because it can be useful if I want to cook two things at once, right? Has anybody ever done this with refrigerators? You go out and buy like a nice fuel-efficient refrigerator, but you still have the old refrigerator in the garage for like extra drinks and things like that, maybe. So things like this can really help us pick up on accurate data beyond human input. So some of the common design pitfalls, as we heard, is it can be hard to get accurate, high-quality input. You saw with the Red Balloon Challenge, many people are putting in information, only some of it's accurate. What happens if we have dominant users, right? So one, we don't want to have groupthink where people don't feel comfortable saying something if they disagree with the crowd because all input can be very valuable and you want to have a way to evaluate that fairly. But another is there's actually been fear of sabotage in some crowdsourcing platforms, believe it or not. So the follow-up DARPA challenge after the red balloons was in 2011. They put out a challenge called the Shredder Challenge, and they asked people to help piece together documents that had been shredded. Unfortunately, there were some people sabotaging the efforts, which made the task way more difficult, but also really led to frustration and low morale, because you can imagine people are coming together, working really hard to piece things together, and they come back the next day and it's all been kind of taken apart. So we really want to find ways to have accountability and also equity in the system. if something is not very pleasant to engage with or participate with, we're not very likely to use it, right? And so we want to make sure our crowdsourcing platforms are very engaging and rewarding. And there can also be barriers to use that prevent people from participating in crowdsourcing platforms. Has anybody ever had an application on their phone that's just like super confusing and you're not really quite sure, or don't want to spend the time to figure it out? There's also other barriers to use, like in areas where there's a digital divide, so not everyone has access to certain mobile devices, certain technologies or internet, or even electricity, and so we want to be really conscious of how we can build systems that are inclusive. So some of the common design features that people use to address this are thinking about how to design for accessibility. This is not only things that are like easy to navigate, but maybe your app has the ability to have the text be very large and readable, to have audio options for those who are visually impaired, and that are just easy to use in a lot of different ways. You want to have ways, of course, to evaluate what's coming in, and often you can even ask the users to help you do this. You can ask the crowd to help you evaluate as well, to help address, issues of accuracy and quality. It's really great to have incentives. So the MIT team for the red balloons actually shared the financial prize with those who helped them identify the correct balloons. People also sometimes do gamification, which is making something a fun game. You may have points and it could be more fun to participate. And then having more egalitarian designs. A study in 2017 done by UPenn showed that you're better able to leverage the wisdom of a crowd when you have a more egalitarian design, where people can give their input more equitably and feel included. So let's go through some quick examples. This is a project that I helped work on with some colleagues from MIT, and these are some photos we took, which was after Hurricanes Ira and Maria in Puerto Rico. So one of the challenges we wanted to see if we can use crowdsourcing to help address was that water quality for drinking was a big concern, and there are even some outbreaks of diseases like leptospirosis happening last fall. Immense damage was done to the water infrastructure, right? Which is both the supply system and the treatment system done by government. And the government, of course, understandably, was overwhelmed, so it could be really hard for them to assess and get information out to people about where was water safe to drink. So in comes the power of the crowd, right? This is Pamela, one of our amazing colleagues. She's an engineer in Puerto Rico who was helping to train people on how to test their own water sources and post it in a way that other people could see. What did the water tests look like? So some of the tests that we used looked at coliform bacteria as an indicator for how contaminated your water might be. I keep stepping off the video camera screen, sorry. And so you can count colonies in the Petri film test, which is the one to your left. And then in the other test, the colors can help tell you the presence of different coliform, whether you have coliforms or fecal coliform bacteria in your water. And if you weren't sure about how to interpret this yourself to submit to the system, all you have to do is send a photo to one of the engineers on hand in Puerto Rico and in the US supporting this project, and then they could help enter that data for you. This has also been used by other teams at MIT to understand water quality after the Christchurch earthquake in 2011 in New Zealand. So lots of people are using crowdsourcing platforms like this to look at water quality and other things that you might care about when you're doing responses to crises and things that are very time sensitive, and you also need to gather a lot of information at once. Many of you are probably familiar with citizen science. Yes, I see some heads nodding. Great. So not so far from us is the Mystic River Watershed Association. They protect the health of our Mystic River watershed, and they've been running a successful citizen science project, which is where you'd be gathering data, often together with support of experts, gathering and analyzing data to better understand what's happening in our worlds. So they were counting fish at fish ladders. And recently they've added a digital version, so from the comfort of your own home, you can log onto their website and watch videos that have been put at the fish ladders, and you can just look at videos of fish going by and help count. This initiative has helped them understand that herring populations have actually been declining in our area here, which helps us be better advocates as well as help us understand what we need to research more and do You can also engage in collaborative design. Some of you may be familiar with this very famous crowdsourcing platform called Foldit. The website is fold.it, very easy to remember. It's a really fun protein folding game. If you haven't tried it yet, I highly encourage you to check it out. And this is really important, actually, because protein structures are incredibly complex. It's been really hard for us to come up with computational ways to come up with these structures. And the human brain is actually quite good at thinking through like spatially and doing some 3D thinking. So a study by Nature, published in the journal Nature in 2010, suggested that the thousands of users on Foldit are actually able to match, or in some cases outperform, computational ability to do this kind of 3D modeling. And it really matters for us to understand these structures accurately. So for example, a bunch of users were actually cited as co-authors, published as co-authors in a big study that came out in 2011 that accurately identified the 3D model of a certain enzyme that helps us understand a monkey virus that is associated with HIV and AIDS. So it has like really important implications for diseases and our ability to treat them, among other things. So it's not only hard for us to do right now without help from people, but it is very important that we do that. And this uses a fun gamification structure where you can get points. And there's also collaborative research, which is the last example that I'll end on. This is a project being done by the Nike Foundation's Girl Effect, where they're working with young women in sub-Saharan Africa, enabling to be researchers as well as ambassadors in their local communities. So you can imagine this is really great because one, these young women are from that area, they speak the local language, they're more familiar with local culture. They can be a lot less intimidating when they're doing research on issues like reproductive health, right? You can imagine an interviewer or somebody else might be a lot more intimidating, and it could be harder to get accurate data. On top of that, they could be really trusted sources of information, so they can help do educational outreach about what these young women that they're interviewing can do afterwards. So they're very effective researchers. They earn a small salary by doing this, so it's an income generation opportunity to crowdsource in this way. And also, they're gaining skills, right? They're gaining interviewing skills, they're gaining skills on how to do educational outreach, and they could be the next generation of researchers, not just foreigners coming in. So it's a great way to think about how to make things more equitable and inclusive, and also do a better job with research and educational outreach in these communities. So it's not just about what kind of technologies that you're using for your crowdsourcing platform, right? It's absolutely how you use it. All tools and technologies can be a double-edged blade. They all have pros and cons. And we have the opportunity to be really intentional about thinking through how inclusive we can be, how enjoyable we can make it for people to engage. And so for this particular presentation, it's not just about tomorrow's technologies today, it's also about today's technologies, right? Crowdsourcing platforms are around. How do we use them for a better tomorrow? And so I'll end with a few fun ways that you can try it. Some of you may have already tried this before. This is Penguin Watch from Zooniverse. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at this on your computer or your phone before. And they ask you to help scientists count the penguins in footage from Antarctica. So I'll give you a few moments if you'd like to help count some penguins. Don't forget about the ones, partial penguins in the scene up there. And it's really great because all this footage that scientists have can be really hard for them to actually process to get usable data out of it. Like I can set up cameras in different research sites, but it would take me a long time to really figure out and accurately count all of them. And don't worry, the pressure isn't that high because they do compare your count to other people's counts to make sure they can get as accurate as possible. And as you're counting, you're simultaneously helping them to train an artificial intelligence program that automatically counts to help that get more accurate for the future. So if you ever have some time to spare and you want to look at cute penguins or other animals or other things in nature, Zooniverse is a great platform that you can take a look and explore and help scientists around the world. While the weather is good in Boston, which we don't get the whole year round, some of you may want to go outside to help participate in citizen science activities. A few of you may have heard of the Arnold Arboretum's Tree Spotter program, but you can basically help scientists document when different plant species are budding, flowering, when are the leaves changing color, and this helps us understand how plant biological clocks might be changing with climate change. You can try it with others. You can form teams and go on cool platforms like openideo.org. My little brother very recently just won $15,000 for a project on how to innovate in early childhood education. And more importantly than the money was all the feedback that he got by posting his ideas online with his team and all the input that people were giving. This platform has challenges in lots of different topics. So depending on whatever your interest areas are, form a team and there might be some very tangible benefits to participating. And finally, you may consider building your own crowdsourcing platforms, right? And get others to try participating in ways that can help you. Some of you may already be very good at coding and building these platforms. There are also really fun, accessible things to help you do that. The MIT App Inventor is accessible to youth and adults. And you can code your own Android crowdsourcing app if you'd like. So with that, I wish you the best of luck on your crowdsourcing endeavors, and I'm happy to take any questions.